Hi, welcome to Box on the Box, Rock and Celluloid, Bot for short. I'm over Box. This may be a slightly meandering video, but I'm just going to give it a go. What's happened with James Bond and Amazon has kind of kept me awake at night. A mixture of trepidation and getting overexcited. I'm a Bond optimist at heart. And even though Amazon could seriously fuck this up, Bond needed to move forward. Looking over the last few days at reactions online, most people who do, the big online Bond YouTube things, there's general positivity, there's trepidation because of what happened with Star Wars and so forth. But there's a sense that the Broccoli family, Michael G. Wilson, Barbara Broccoli, it's started to stagnate. It's kind of like, did they want to push on? Clearly, Michael G. Wilson is 83. He decided that he didn't want to, and that left Barbara Broccoli kind of on her own, and then she's got other projects, and it's like nothing's permanent. I always say everything's always in a state of flux or long-term or mid-term flux, and this is a case of long-term flux. At some point, this would change hands, and it's clear that the Michael G. Wilson sons, although they've been involved in Bond, they haven't been trained up the way that Michael and Barbara were by Cubby. I remember Michael G. Wilson used to co-write the scripts with Richard Maybaum, so they contributed loads to the series, and right or wrong. Also, looking into it, you had to look at their strike rate. They did produce 9 films together. They produced 3 all-time great Bonds to me: GoldenEye, Casino Royale, and Skyfall. And Tomorrow Never Dies, and I'll say No Time to Die were solid. I know there's criticisms of No Time to Die, but Spectre and Die Another Day, not very good at all. Quantum of Solace is kind of a bit garbagey, if I'm honest. It's heading that way for me. Will is not enough, bit drab on the action stakes. People will disagree. If you looked at Cubby and Harry Saltzman's strike rate, it was actually superior. But obviously they did over 16 films, they produced more classic Bonds, but I think their kind of secondary and third level Bonds were always at a good level. The only time it slipped, the only time we go, fucking all that James Bond films, pre-pants, is A View to a Kill. And that was just a Bond with Roger too far. So that's the thing, what I'm saying is, like, Barbara and Michael didn't have the permanent golden touch, and neither did Cubby. No one does. So, whoever Amazon put in over the course of these films of this whole project may strike gold. I think if you look at something like the Mission Impossible films, it's a good comparison there. They're coming up for their 8th film, and I don't think any Mission Impossible film has dipped below a certain level. I always hated the second one, but watching it recently, I kind of give it a 6 out of 10. And you can see what they've done with the character there, Ethan Hunt. So, you've got to get out of the blocks, all guns blazing, and you want to be all guns blazing all the time, but it may be this thing will dip sometimes, and it may be terrible, but hopefully they've got to have the right producer in charge. I think someone British backed. You've got to think about the Bond team. The Bond team's been slowly broken up in the last few films. You've not had David Arnold doing the music. They stopped using the kind of same cinematographer years ago. Peter Lamont died, so you've got different production designers. I noticed the casting ladies kind of stepped aside, Debbie Williams or Debbie McWilliams, I think. So there's lots of kind of elements there where that's broken up. So do the new Amazon people, do they try to put together a core team, or do they have to just have a producer who's kind of putting stuff out there, writers and so on, to kind of come up with ideas? Do they shoot at Pinewood? It's part of like the Bond legacy, but it might be cheaper for Amazon to buy their own freaking studio and not do it there, and that means you're not using British technicians. There's a lot of things here, a lot of elements. So as far as like the casting of Bond, I've already said I think this potentially opens it up for Henry Cavill. He's done films for Prime, and if they wanted to get a solid actor in who I think audience will like, and they want to knock out, they can't do Daniel Craig and take fucking ages over it, knock out a Bond film every 2 or 3 years. Cavill he's 42 this year. You could be 43, 44 by the time the film comes out. It's a bit older. It's older than Dalton was, it's older than Brosnan was. Not quite as old as Moore. But If he's 44, you're doing a film in 2 years. 46, maybe 3 years after that, he's 49. Maybe another 2, 3 years after that, he's in his early 50s. I'm starting to feel that the actor going on and playing James Bond over a lot of films or a long period of time, it's maybe a good time to move away from that. We'd all love to see a third Dalton, and I'd love Pierce to have a better fifth one. We'll come to that. But I think, they don't want to go on too long in years. Roger did 12 years, 7 films, and, it probably wouldn't be better if he did 10 and 5 films and, 6 films in 10 years. So I think a James Bond actor could just play it for 3 films, or if the third film's not great, well, let's give him a 4th one. But getting a new Bond in always reinvigorates things. At the moment, everyone's feeling reinvigorated because we know now we will get a new James Bond. It's been kind of like, well, we're getting a new James Bond, and it's felt like it's taken an eternity, but that is coming. It's going to happen. So that's really exciting. And the Cavill way is a way to kind of get it activating really quick. Another thing they could do for sourcing material is look at alternative James Bond novels. A lot of people think the Raymond Benson ones, some of the plot points, ideas in those, probably not the John Gardner ones, but the Raymond Benson ones were kind of done and kind of continued sort of the Brosnan era. I was watching a feature, I forget the name of the channel, there's loads of good Bond stuff out there, and that could be a way to kind of source material and develop Bond scripts. I think the other thing is, when you're doing your first Bond, you don't need it to be too complicated plot-wise. It's James Bond. Do an incredible pre-title sequence, have a cracking song, get someone good in to do it, get a good writer, do a cracking title sequence. Hopefully they'll keep Daniel Kleinman or find someone as good as him. Or it could be her, whatever. Then just have, there's a pretty good super villain or villain. Make sure you cast a good actor, cast a good Bond woman, love interest. Maybe have him, with another woman at the start. If you look back in Bond films, he doesn't have to be shagging left, right and centre. I think we went a bit mad in the Roger era, but generally speaking in the Brosnan era, it's usually like with 1, 2 women, maybe there's a woman at the start, there's a bit of shenanigans, and then it's onwards. So, just have him doing his alpha thing, have the standard sort of big 3 after the pre-credit sequence, have your standard sort of big action sequence a bit after that, have your big climax, make sure it's good, maybe some cool chase sequence in the middle. There's a formula here, and there's nothing wrong with just going with that formula because it's worked for years. The political climates change, people's attitudes change, and so forth, social attitudes, but at the end of the day, you don't need to kind of mess with James Bond too much. So that's my feeling there. So a director who's not mentioned, and again, this might not be popular, and I don't know if I'd like it, but he could be someone who they consider, and it's a person who does a lot of work. His films come out on Amazon, is Guy Ritchie. It's not a name that's popped up with anyone, but Guy Ritchie, there's the League of Ungentlemanly Warfare, is it? I think he did that. He certainly did another straight to Amazon film with Jason Statham, Hugh Grant, and his films kind of do well on streaming still. So he's got a relationship with Amazon, as has Cavill, with that previous film I mentioned. So, obviously he couldn't do all his daft speed ramping stuff and slow-mo stuff. So it'd be sort of, Guy Ritchie on, less personal form, but he might be someone who they might tap up. Guy Ritchie did the Man from U.N.C.L.E. Film, which a lot of people actually quite liked, had a cool look. But at the same time, he's an experienced filmmaker, and I think that's the other thing. I don't think they should make a Marvel mistake where they're getting in some indie director who's only done two films or something. I think it needs a steady hand. Then there's the Martin Campbell option, Mr. Reboot. Okay, since his glory days, he has been doing a lot of B movies and straight to streaming stuff, but he's still out there working. I thought the film he did with Jackie Chan, Pierce Brosnan, was actually pretty good, The Foreigner. If he's got the energy at 8 years old to still do it, that's another safe pair of hands. People will have their fantasy directors to come in, like Christopher Nolan and so forth, but remember, these filmmakers have very distinctive styles. The closest Bond has ever come really to having a filmmaker with some kind of distinctive style is Sam Mendes, who just quite kind of opulent looking films with like very strong master shots. And you know, they allowed him that big Steadicam take, which was flashy, but maybe it's not right to draw attention to the director in the Bond film. So that's my kind of viewpoint there. So I think it's better if the director's probably British. But yeah, I'm thinking experience, steady hand, and you know, you don't need to mess with the formula too much. They sort of did that with the reboot Casino Royale. It was cool, it was great, but you know, James Bond. The other thing is, I don't think they'll do necessarily a younger actor thing because they'll be tempted to do a James Bond the early days show. So that's not something I'm into because that infringes on the cinematic James Bond. Okay, so I'm going to get down with mad ideas. I've already wrestled with this for 11 minutes, but anyway. So one of the things about the TV idea is you can cast people who maybe would have been an interesting Bond in a certain era or something like that, but you know, they haven't been cast as Bond. Now, an actor who people mention is Josh O'Connor. Now, obviously, he plays Prince Charles in The Crown. His ears stick out too much. I think he's a really good actor, but he's not quite right. But as people have said, if you wanted to set a James Bond in the 1950s or 60s, probably 1950s, he's actually got quite a kind of a good look for that because he's got that old sort of English traditional look. So my concept is if they wanted to do a TV series about the early years of M, so this is when M is an agent after the war. It could be, you know, as a spy master in charge of him, it could be more Cold War, much more sort of John le Carre, but with a bit of upped action. And Josh O'Connor would work well as like a young M, I think, kind of thing. People might think this is mad. I don't know how many episodes this would be. But this could also lead into the Josh O'Connor character in another series, a kind of spin-off following from this series of him becoming M, and they want to create a new department. They want to call it Universal Exports, a division within MI6, and they want him to come up with and train, recruit special agents who will be licensed to kill, and he will create the 00 branch. God, I'm getting emotional with that. So, you know, maybe you could have him recruit the first 00, or I don't know, but it would not involve 007. There could be a reference to that when the series are. These 00s are working well, apart from that number 7. I don't know. But I think that could be, this would be more Cold War. It would be an emphasis on spycraft. Like I say, M more as a John le Carre. Christ, what's George? Not like a George Smiley, but like, you know, a more, you know, action George Smiley, but that thing. So you kind of got a two-pronged thing there. That's just an idea. Next one I've got is okay. So the other thing is there's been this whole thing of villains and people have been laughing Blofeld the early years and stuff like this. And I'm thinking about it, this MID, Universal Exports, maybe he could come across the Blofeld character or the early incarnation of what will become Spectre. That might be an interesting thing, and possibly maybe with that threat rising post in the Cold War era, that's why the 00s are created. So you'd have to reference Spectre, but you know, you could have, there's this bloke, he's dodgy. I don't know, but that might work. But the one villain I think who might, you know, because I've gone through all these, you're not going to have Goldfinger. Someone put Odd Job. He's mute. How Odd Job became mute. But the one villain who I think you could do an interesting TV show set in the time before we found him in Bond is, of course, Scaramanga. There's the Grey Circus story. how he meets Nick Nack, but Scaramanga, I mean, the Chris Lee character is very alluring. He's kind of anti-hero. He's the anti-Bond, isn't he? So a kind of 1950s, 1960s set, Cuba. He's a Cuban assassin, isn't he? You know, you could do some interesting stuff with that. And obviously, recently you've had the Dare the Jackal TV reboot, which I thought worked really well. So if you think about the Scaramanga idea of this super assassin who's becoming like the golden shot, that could be quite interesting and have to be, I think, a period piece, but it might not be. But that's the only villain I can come up with where that could be a potential TV show. Of course, Scaramanga is a great name. Again, people may be watching this going, this guy's lost his mind. But anyway, I'm just trying to get in the spirit of this. Okay, that brings us to the next. This is the extra controversial one. We all wanted a better Brosnan to finish on. And I think we'd have to do this very soon. But there's been talk, let's do another Brosnan one. Let's just bring the guy back for one film. But maybe they could establish the new cinematic 007, get that going, and then do a Brosnan one on a lower budget, but still a good budget, but to go straight to streaming, but just do a kind of gritty, down-to-earth Brosnan Bond where Brosnan has to come out of retirement. Maybe a plot where a kind of like, people want to exact revenge on him. There's people settling old scores. It's a classic Cold War plot. Not it's a Cold War now, but something like that. And he kind of has to break Curry's retirement and, reenact his 00 or something like that. And if you think about the gritty action films of older action stars like Denzel Washington, Liam Neeson, obviously it needs to be better than what Liam Neeson's doing now. But Brosnan, he went sky high, didn't he? He went Moonraker territory, Die Another Day, but obviously not as good. And typically after that, Bond would go back down to earth, For Your Eyes Only, Majesty's Secret Service, to Timothy Dalton reboot. So we never got that. So that could be a possible idea. But Pierce Brosnan's 70, 72 this year. So you really need. I've noticed actually there's a thing coming out with Michael Fassbender, and he's playing the kind of Fassbender's playing a spy. Kate Blanchett, and noticed that Pierce Brosnan's the spy, but he's like the M character. So this is maybe out there, but I don't. You've got to move forward with the cinematic Bond, but this would be a way for fans to kind of get like a cool final Brosnan, but you'd have to do it. He's not going to be still in the field probably at his age. Which brings me to Timothy Dalton. Okay, so we never got a third Dalton. So my concept for this is it's kind of the same ideas you had. Universal Export, it's been created, creating the 00s and so on. This would be a kind of present day thing where maybe the 00s, obviously not 007, but it's been decimated, a mission's gone wrong, or some kind of terrorist or hitmen or whatever, but the 00 program has been decimated. They need to get new recruits in, and they need the best person to train them. So again, you bring Bond out of retirement, but it's Dalton's Bond this time, and he trains new recruits, and then maybe someone go on a mission, and then it goes wrong, and he has to get involved. Again, Timothy Dalton's very old. He's 78 now. But he can probably pass the 70, dye his hair. But again, you have to act fast. But it'd be great to see his Bond one more time, give us the kind of third experience. He's kind of like Maverick Top Gun, isn't it? Where he trains the new recruits. But again, that'd make a cool film, but you can't interfere with the cinematic James Bond. So that's why I've put this as like a TV show idea, and the Brosnan is straight to streamer. Like I say, I know he's a mad. I've probably lost my mind. Maybe this just putting it out there, and other people have ideas, so they go like, "You're completely insane." Okay, so you're going to get a female spin-off, not a female 007, but a female 00, and it's perfectly feasible that there is female 00 agents. You need female 00 agents, at least one. Okay. I would say it's going to either be 006 or 008. There's no point in having like 005. I've always thought as well the 00s, they can't go up to 10. It's like 0010, 00. It doesn't work. It's got to be single numbers. There's 9 00s. So maybe 008, this is the kind of in the Bond universe, and it's a female spy. You've got your TV option, you do like a show like Alias, or you do your film. If you were to do that, like a film, you'd have to have Bonding tropes, but it'd have to be different. She'd have to have her own theme. If you got like, you could a different spin on the gun barrel thing, a different spin on the credits. You'd probably wouldn't do that. Maybe you wouldn't have a pre-credit scenes. I don't know. God, this is like really, you really something like this has to have its own identity within this. And now I'm kind of thinking out loud. It opens up a whole load of problems. Who you class 2 actresses who I think would make great Bond women are Florence Pugh and Vanessa Kirby. I think either of them, maybe even Florence Pugh, if they were to introduce Tracy again, one of those, and certainly Florence Pugh, because she's quite quirky in a way. So Kirby would hit the spot, but I feel as well either of these actresses would have the kind of chops and the experience to kind of do this. But there'd always be that problem of, you've got to get past that thing where you can't have, you can, but it's not realistic, and there's a lot of complaints online about when you have like women duffing up blokes who are twice the size and built like brick shit houses. The female 00 would need to have use her wits a lot, use objects, get out of situations. It'd be a different approach to James Bond. The worst thing they could do is just go, let's make a James Bond style film with a female 00. You've got to think it different and think how a female 00 agent, how they'd operate and how they'd, use themselves in situations and so forth. So this TV show, it could tie in with my concept of the Timothy Dalton's training new recruits. This is the new recruit, 008, and then you get the film spin-off. But there's a good chance this will happen, so we might as well think about this. Okay, legacy characters, villains. I forgot to mention this in the films, but I've been thinking recently, well, what could they do? And he's in a lot of things as a villain, and he seems to be in too much, but I just think the bloke's a fucking great villain. It's Giancarlo Esposito. When you hear his speech, the way he carries himself in scenes, I know he's in The Boys, I know he's in The Gentleman, I think he's in the new Captain America? He is, I think. Yeah, he's in too much as a villain, but he's got a way of speaking and a way of being that you can just imagine him getting his minions to do his dirty work, and he'd hold great scenes with Bond, that actor. So I'm putting that out there. Another kind of legacy character who'd be interested to introduce into the film at some point is Rosa Klebb. But what I would do is make her younger. She could still have her spikes to poison people, but I know she's played this character before, but by the time they cast her, it would be quite a while since she was villain now. And of course I'm talking about Jodie Comer. Jodie Comer would be fantastic as a kind of young kind of Rosa Klebb, and as an adversary, a female adversary for Bond. Just putting it out there, just an idea. Of course, Red Grant is another character I'm using with legacy character, and that could be sort of reboot. But then again, I've always used a blonde henchman since then. Like I said, I don't know, if this is going to work or not. But they did bring back Blofeld. They probably shouldn't have, or they should have handled it differently. Felix Leiter, this is a tricky one. This. Pedro Pascal, he's in too many things, but he would be a good Felix Leiter, as with David Harbour, and he's already been like an agent in Quantum of Solace. But I don't know, a good American actor who's a little bit older, when I quite like Boyd Holbrook, has got a kind of, he'd do a good sort of homespun Texas type thing. Joel Kinnaman is really good at that if you watch him into All Mankind. Don't know if it's Joel Kinnaman, he's very tall, you know. There's a likelihood he'd be taller and kind of more kick-ass and Bond himself. I'm not sure Felix should be able to impose himself over Bond in a way. But that's just, the other thing with Felix is, and again, people might complain about this, but Felix could be short for Felicity. You could have a female Felix like that. I know that's controversial, but that could happen. As you could have a female Q, more, you know, there's more women now doing science, engineering and stuff. If there was a female Q, an actress I like is Olivia Cook. She's in Slow Horse, she's in House of the Dragon. If you actually heard her speak in a real accent, she's got an older Manchester accent, and that'd be quite cool to have that if you imagine her in a lab, you know, sparring with Bond, but in this like soft northern accent. It's just my take, but I think that's the other thing as well. I think it's at that stage where they should reboot every kind. I think we should have a new M, new Q. I think, you know, this is the point in the past, you know, we have carried M and weirdly in the from the Brosnan to the Craig. And I love Ray Fiennes. I really like what Ray Fiennes did, although he, you know, he didn't get the best films as M. I really like Ben Whishaw as well, but I like Naomi Harris. But I think this is, you know, it's time to totally do the fresh thing with this. So I can't think about M. I'm not sure who could play him. An actor I quite like Simon Russell Beale, but I think he's a bit old. But he'd kind of be like, it's like casting an older guy as like a real kind of spy master type figure. But I do like Tom Hollander. Tom Hollander's got great sarcastic delivery, and you could have a really kind of comical, sarcastic relationship with Bond. So Tom Hollander is someone who I quite like for that. As an idea, I'm looking at my sheet and I think the only other Emma mentioned is Idris Elba. Now this could be weird. That's that thing where you cast someone who's been linked with Bond and people are like, oh, you should cast Idris Elba. But I think he could be a good M because you know he's actually, that guy will have been in the field. He would have been SS and he would have kicked ass. And again, you can have a more kind of physical, confrontational relationship with Bond. And Elba could really get in on the action, you know, when they've been bringing the team out, which Fiennes did. So that's, you know, these are all ideas. Other people have their ideas. What about this? You know, do you make the Bond films in the 1950s, 60s? You know, do you redo the old books? Do you redo Moonraker with a proper plot from the Fleming novel? The thing is, that, as I've said, the 00 producers always did the films kind of 5 minutes into the future. I think the other thing in terms of like the financing, you've got to have the sponsorship and the drinks, and of course Aston Martin. That was the other thing I had for one gadget. Obviously, the Aston Martin is a big thing in Bond, and of course we're switching to electric cars. So having Bond in an electric Aston Martin and this creating a kind of antagonistic bit with Q could be quite interesting because of course Bond's a petrol head. But this car could be, you know, cutting edge. Its charge will go for miles, but it'll have a stealth mode. And it can go silent. God, this sounds like Knight Rider, isn't it? Okay. But anyway, it could do. Maybe it could turn into a plane. Scaramanga's car turned into a plane. Let's have a stealth Aston Martin that turns into a plane. There you go. Awesome. Right. Yeah, maybe that is crazy. Anyway, that's my sort of mad, some ideas. I thought, oh, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. Who knows? Okay, I'll see you again soon. Cheers.